This is a tutorial for UNC Charlotte 2101 students that is a compendium to the original tutorial opening up the template file. And this now uses the DWG template file to show a couple more commands in a bit more detail based on a few questions we've received this week. So I'm going to just go down to AutoCAD 2013. I've already got a template file open, and zoom in here. You can see I've got, like we had in the original tutorial video, I've got the spectrum of layers for black, the red line weights, and then the gray line weights to pick from. First thing we're going to talk about, just go over, is the line versus polyline scenario. And that's actually something that's come up a few times in class, and figured just kind of go over it one more time. You can always grab those from the menus over here, or you can type in line or polyline to get at the command. So I'm going to draw a line, and with a line I just can continue running by left clicking and creating any sort of shape I want, following any path I want, and then hitting enter or a right click to terminate that. Except with line, I now have this as separate segments with the line tool, even though I continuously drew it separate segments. For a polyline, I now can trace that exact same path I did, or any path you want, but I'm going to trace the exact same path to show that that figure, again hitting enter to end it, is now one entire object. So I'll move that down so you can see that the top version was my original line with separate segments, and then what I traced over it was a polyline. This thing still has the same grips, things I can grab to distort. Again, using the blue grip by default is typically the activating of the vertices and nodes that you can grab a hold of to snap to and distort to other things. Whereas if I grab this line and this line only and I move, notice it did not stretch that line with it. So again, that's what the fundamental difference between it and the polyline. I can of course grab in lines together, again with this pick box that goes from bottom right to upper left. This selects anything it intersects, regardless if it intersects the entire object or just a portion of it. And now I can distort that, but I had to select that as two separate things. So again, if I just go back here and grab the polyline, it gives me the entire thing active just with one selection, one element selected. So I'm just going to erase those, go back, and now we're going to go over the idea of how to show a dimension while you're actually in a command, like the line command. So by default, when you're not on the ortho, which is down here along the bottom toolbar, it's also Command L is the shortcut on the Mac, or I believe it's F8. Function 8 is the shortcut command on Windows. But if I draw this, you'll notice I'm just drawing in space. The coordinates are appearing down in the bottom right of the screen, but it really doesn't help you much for the distances, especially if you're trying to trace something or figure out a relative dimension. You have two options to get a dimension. One is you actually type it in via the coordinates with the @ as we talked about in the earlier tutorial, or if you actually turn on the ortho prompt, now with that constraint, the ortho constraint, it now gives me a dimension in the direction I'm going. So I'm going at an angle of 0 degrees, and I'm roughly 14 feet 9 inches, 10, 11. So it gives you the idea, and then at any point I can just type in 15 feet in the command prompt down below, and I've got that line at 15 feet. Similarly, if I go up with my line, you notice the angle's 90 degrees. That means it's 90 degrees from this plane, and I'm up, and now I can again do 15 feet, or any dimension I want, giving me a line vertically that way. And if I go this direction, I'm now 180 degrees, but again, it's by default already doing that because it's ortho constrained. To the left is going to be 180 degrees, to the right is going to be 0, because you're moving around a circle from 0 degrees to 90 degrees, and now to 180 degrees. And then lastly, going down is going to be 270 degrees, 15 feet. And again, if I go back in the center, this way is 0, up to the top is 90, to the left is 180 degrees, 270, back around to 360, which resets to 0 degrees. So with that command sort of understood, it's now I think worthwhile to just show the other sort of way to deal with extensions or guidelines is actually the command XLINE, Xline. And Xline is actually a line that can be horizontal, vertical, at an angle, can bisect something or be offset from something. For our purposes in the course, especially this semester, we'll just draw our own directional piece where you click once, left button, and then you go to the right, up, down, whichever it is if you're tracing something. But now it actually can select and it runs to infinity with another left click. And now with this element, I actually see that it goes forever. It will just continue extending forever. This just shows where its origin point was. But this thing, for all intents and purposes, runs forever. And I can use it now using the offset command. Let's say if I want to offset 5 feet, I now have guidelines every 5 feet. And this may not seem like it's a necessary tool, but at the same time, if you're looking to, say, I'll turn off ortho here, and let's say I trace something or I have a line that is at this angle, and now I need to draw other lines or snap other things to it, I have several options to actually get other lines that are parallel or perpendicular to this element. But one of the things I can do is actually create a X line, and it's a construction line, along that angle, and now I can get this line infinitely as well in a coordinate plane. So again, it can be very helpful to sort of locate particular pieces. So again, I can now offset this thing 5 feet and so on. And as you can see, it actually now runs a set of ribs across that at the grain I want. And I can, of course, copy this. I should say, actually, I could probably just draw a line from the midpoint of the line here, and then holding down Shift and right click brings up the snaps toolbar, the snaps I don't have on. I have a few of these on already as auto snap, but I can Shift and right click brings up this menu while you're active in a command, and now I can take that line and go perpendicular, and I could create another guideline, and now I've got myself a grid to work off of. So again, this is where you sort of end up with a way to deal with things, especially in the non-orthogonal condition if you need regulating lines. And these can be put on the, obviously by selecting these, I can put them all on the layer of non-plot. And as we talked about earlier in the previous tutorial, now if I open up the layer manager, I can select non-plot and actually make it a locked layer. So I don't have to worry about ever deleting it. Let's say if I select all these and I want to erase them, it will not erase that locked layer. So now my guidelines are protected from that. So I'll undo, go back out, and now I'll actually come back to the tool we were just using, which is the offset tool. And for this purposes, I'm just going to draw a line, and I'm going to say that some sort of system here where I want to locate how far the offset should be. Well, there's a couple things you can do. One of them is running through here and actually start to, as we know, not use the offset tool, but kind of copy things in a pattern that you are tracing over or trying to get a grain. But if you actually want some sort of control, which most of us do, for this purposes, I'll use the orthogonal tool. If I go back and I have 2 lines, and I actually want to offset that distance, offset allows you to, down here, enter a distance, or by default, draw the distance, actually mark it. So I want to offset continuously this same dimension. So if I go here, I'm going to Shift right click to make sure I'm perpendicular to that line. And now I've got myself an offset that is equal to that space. And it's again, it's like click on it left and then click one more time left in the direction of the offset I want. And I end up with this sort of repetitive element using that original spacing without really knowing the dimension. I can always get that dimension by hitting DI for distance, and actually running that distance tool, and it's somewhere around 3 feet 8 inches. Or I can actually just go back to the offset command and see what the default is, because that's what it's set at. The last thing offset will remember is the last dimension you entered or actually truly traced. So this was that 3 feet 8 and 3/8 inches is that dimension between these two lines, and that will hold that. Similarly, if you want to repeat offsetting over and over again, you actually can end up with a system where you use an array idea. So instead of just offsetting, keep clicking and going, you can actually use the array tool over here. So if I select the rectangular array and select this object and right click, what you notice is it's sort of pretty tight right now, this element, but what I can do is it's set up to be 4 rows, 4 columns, and 3 rows. Well, I only need 1 row vertically. I just want to go horizontal in this exhibit. And I actually then can enter. I can even sort of enter from there, and you notice it's very tight compared to what I want. Well, if I go and select on the object, one of the things that comes up when you're actually in the edit mode is this idea where you can start to stretch the columns apart, and you can do that manually by just grabbing the grip that's here, this arrow piece, or you can actually take on the idea of the spacing and you can start to edit the actual space between the lines themselves. So I just did this by stretching the actual element by this middle triangle piece, sort of grows apart, goes through. Instead, I can erase that, go back to my rectangular array. Oh, sorry, I should originally draw the line again. Now again, I want to use a rectangular array for this. And now I've got this piece here, and I can say that I want to change the spacing with an S down here. You notice I select the capital is actually the shortcut. So this thing is it wants to do associative base point, count, spacing, columns, rows, whichever. So I can change my spacing to, and I'll do 3 feet 8 inches. And now there you have a 4 column set and 3 vertical rows. Again, if I just wanted to have just 1 row, I now have that exact same offset, but instantaneously. I could change this to 10 and now, or 20, and it just keeps growing, knowing that I'm 3 feet 8 inches apart, and I'm now essentially set up to specify the distance between rows, specify the distance between columns, and I just hit enter again to actually exit out. So I'm now down to my original rows, and I'm back to that sort of initial array. So again, by being inside the command, select the grip to edit an array, and I actually use S for spacing, and I'm at 3 feet 8 inches. I can change this to 8 feet, and now I'm actually able to enter out, and then now I have, again, that 3 rows up and 4 columns over array set. The only other element that came up today as far as actual tools that we're talking about was actually the idea of trimming multiple objects. So I'm going to use this circle as an element that was part of my diagram set or something I'm using, and I'm just going to draw some elements, and now that we've got things copied, now with the trim tool, wondering about the best way to sort of go about trimming multiple sequences or lines. So I can select the object I want to use as the cutting edge, hit enter, and now I can select the object or objects I want to trim. And just by doing the bottom right to upper left fencing condition, it trims that set above again, trims that set below, and I can actually erase this and sort of get the gestalt of the circle that I was interested in based on this meter that I had created, whether it be traced or actually dimensioned in that set. So with those, you actually end up sort of seeing the wide variety that exists between the sort of offset individually versus the array. I believe simple as now using the offset tool, this object found again, I'm sorry, the array tool, sorry, I'm using here. And I'm 4 columns. And I'll make it instead, actually I'll make it 10. And I'm going to make the spacing we'll make it 24 inches. Now I'm out, and I'm going to set up now the circle. Again, let's say that's my shape. And I can go back to my trim function, again, selecting my cutting edge and entering out. And I actually need to, as you see, I'm not able to actually trim those lines with that condition. Instead, what I have to do is actually explode them. And this is very much only recommended when you're taking apart a sort of hatch or an array system. So you explode these, and now these end up with, they're no longer editable as a group, they're separate lines. So I just exploded my array, and I can go and select my surface and trim again. So again, I'm going to go back and undo to when I had hatch. You notice how it doesn't have a series of grips and nodes. It has almost like a hatch kind of quality to it where there's just a bounding beginning and end piece. That means it's a smart object and therefore not necessarily trimmable because it's not just a series of simple vectors. To get it that way, you just explode, which is literally typing in that command or using the icon, but if you explode that, you now have individual lines. And I can now type in trim, select my cutting edge. Again, that's how I arrived at that edge from an array. So the difference between the hatch and the array is actually a smart object, and if you need to manipulate it further or trim it or create a shape, you actually have to explode it. So those tools sort of run through our condition of the actual sequence that came up this week for general elements with the drawing. The only other thing I wanted to say is in case you ever get artifacting, which I can't really create in this tutorial, but artifacting meaning you see some ghosted objects here or your curves start to become polylines and lose some of their refinement, you can use a command called regen all. And you see how it's typed in R-E-G-E-N-A-L-L, regen all. And that basically refreshes the entire screen, and sometimes whether it be through the graphics driver, the amount of content within the file, or just simply that particular file, you might lose some detail that's not really quote-unquote lost. It's actually just set up in a way that the simplification of the geometry just made itself apparent, and by hitting regen all, it essentially refreshes the entire visual interface of CAD. It affects your drawing in no way, positive or negative, by regen all, but it can help clear up some visual things if you're getting some artifacting. If for some reason you end up with elements in your drawing that you don't want, what I'll do is I'm going to do actually a file save as, and I'm going to save to my desktop this test file with today's date. And if I save this test file, let's say I have deleted everything in here but these two lines. There are many ways to do this, but I'll just show you the sort of most sophisticated and therefore I think the cleanest one. I'm actually going to open my original template, which in the earlier tutorial you'll recall actually has a series of other line work in there that I showed for examples with plotting. But let's say I just want to grab this line set. I want this line set in particular. And in my other drawing, we go back up here, we notice I don't have that line set. I have only those two pieces in it. So I want to bring those into this drawing. I can copy with a base point, C-O-P-Y, and you notice this the second one out, copy base. I know that this white line exists in the drawing, so I can actually use that as a reference point if I want this to appear in the exact same location in both drawings. So I'm going to use this white line's endpoint as my base point. And now it's asking me, after I give a base point, to select the object. So I specified the base point, and now down here it says select objects, again following that prompt. I'm going to select these two lines. I'm going to enter out. And now when I get into the other drawing, I can now paste clip. And that's actually pasting what's in the clipboard, which in that purpose we just clip those two lines. I hit enter, and now it wants to locate, specify the insertion point with a paste clip. It wants particulars. And now I have located these two red lines in the exact same position as they were in the other drawing. The other option, which people have been talking around in Studio, is just by selecting the object and Command C, copy like it is in other programs, and then coming into this drawing, what I'll do is I'll first erase these lines, and then Command V, I now have this object. I don't have it now smartly located, but if you're just trying to bring data in, bring other line work into a certain drawing, you can just Command C and then Command V, and then it just wants to specify that insertion point. And now I've located that element. So that should walk you through the most recent set of questions that came up. As always, please do not hesitate to ask your fellow studio mates and other classes about any particulars, and make sure to, of course, Google issues as well. And just to reiterate, I would encourage you to continue using both the autosave function that we set up first day, but also the save as function, because as come up many times, these files are not very large, but it's great to avoid just nesting just with simple saves, just in case things get corrupted or files get just quirky or bogged down with some particular issue. It's just great to have saving as an option as well. So saving copies with today's date, and then tomorrow doing the same with tomorrow's date, so you can keep working linearly and always go back and get it. Thanks.